Hello everyone, welcome to Tech Sharmit. In this session, we are going to talk about another very important topic for SVG, that is gradient. Okay, although in Canvas we have discussed about the gradient thing, but here we will talk about the gradient in respect to SVG. So we will just discuss like how we can create a gradient effect for a scalable vector graphic. To explain this thing, I have noted down all the required attribute and description that we can use with a gradient method. And if we talk about gradient, so there are two type of ways to draw the gradient. First one is linear gradient method and second one is radial gradient method. Okay, so in this session we will just mainly talk about the linear gradient method. Okay, but before we start about this thing, we should know about what is gradient. So gradient is nothing but a smooth transition from one color to another. Okay, or in addition you can say that when several color transitions can apply to the same kind of element, then this thing is known as linear gradient method. Okay, so this is called just a simple gradient effect. But how many ways are there to create this kind of gradient effect? We have two ways. One is through linear and one is through radial. Okay, and both of these gradient method will be defined under the defs keyword. Okay, so whenever you create a def element, inside that defs element you can create your gradient effect either by using linear gradient or by using radial gradient. Okay, so this is just a theoretical thing. Now we will discuss a bit more thing about linear gradient in theoretical, but prior to that let's talk about the code. So here you can see the code is simple and straightforward. I have just noted down one heading as HTML by Tech Sharmit and one title given as Tech Sharmit. Okay, and then there is some comments which shows the attribute as well as description for linear gradient element. So we will discuss each and everything. But before we start the discussion, I would like to recommend you to please go and check out the previously released sessions first, because they all are in proper sequence and sync. So if you follow the sequentially, then it would be very easy for you to understand the ongoing topic. Because for now we are just focusing on the linear gradient method, but prior to that you should know how to draw shapes, how to draw graphics, because that we are using here, right? Alright, so let's start with the code. And if I save this code and refresh it, you can see it is showing like this, HTML by Tech Sharmit. So let's put another heading here, the main topic heading, which is linear gradient effect in SVG. Okay, so this is the heading H2. Now what we will do after this we will talk about the linear gradient effect theoretically. So the linear gradient element is mainly used to define a linear gradient, which means a linear transition of color from one color to another or from one direction to another. Okay, this element is often nested with defs, which we already discussed, right? So whatever you are defining, it should be nested inside a defs. Now if we typically talk about the linear gradient method, then it can be defined in three ways. One is horizontal, second is vertical, and third one is angular. Now what is the difference between horizontal linear gradient, vertical linear gradient, or angular linear gradient? So the first one, horizontal linear gradient, goes from left to right, where x1 and x2 values are differ and y1 and y2 values are equal. Okay, then we have vertical linear gradient method, where it goes from top to bottom. Here x1 and x2 value are same, but y1 and y2 value are different. In third case, in angular, it is created when x1 and x2 values are different as well as y1 and y2 values are different. Okay, so in third case all values are different. In first case only x1 and x2 are different, and in second case only y1 and y2 are different. Okay, so these are the values that will define which type of gradient effect you are creating. Now we are talking about the attribute, because x1 x2 are attributes. So what they are, I have noted down here. So you can see here ID is required and it defines a unique ID for linear gradient element. Then we have x1. X1 means the x position of the starting point of the vector gradient. Here default value is 0. Then we have x2, the x position of the ending point of the vector gradient, where default value is 100%. Then we have y1, which is the y position of the starting point of the vector gradient, default is 0%. Later on we have y2, where y position of the ending point of the vector gradient is, and default value here is 0%. Then remaining 4 attributes are for, like here I have noted down, spread method, which defines the spread method of the gradient. Possible values are ped, reflect, repeat, and default is ped. Then we have href, which means defines a reference to another linear gradient element that will be used as a template. So sometime like we might use this for referring another gradient, so in that case we will use this href method. Then we have gradient unit that defines the coordinate system for x1, x2, y1, y2. Here possible values are user space on use, object bounding box, and the default value is object bounding box. And then the last attribute is gradient transform, that is for defining the additional transformation to the radiant coordinate system. So these are all possible values or attribute that we can use with linear gradient method. Now quickly we will create the linear gradient effect. Firstly we will create the vertical, okay, not vertical, firstly we will create the horizontal. So for that I will create one example. So let's add SVG, and I'm assuming that you know how to create SVG because this thing we have already discussed many times. So here I'll put the width would be 1000. Then we will put height would be 500. Then we will apply style. Here we will put border 5px solid black. Now save it and refresh it. So once you refresh it, you will see that a SVG has been added on the screen. Now to define the linear effect, we will use defs keyword, defs element. So I just added this defs. Here in defs we will define the linear gradient. So linear gradient, okay. And for this linear gradient we will provide all the required attribute. We'll start from id. So here I'll write id equals to grad1. Then we will put x1 0%, x2 100%, y1 0%, y2 0%. Okay, so this is how we will provide all the required values for the linear gradient element. Now we will add the stop color or stop element. So this is a stop element which used to add the offset or stop color for the gradient. So here we will mention offset would be 0%, stop color would be yellow, okay. Then we will simply copy it just to save the time, and here I'll put it for red. Now I'll make it as red, and offset would be 100%. Okay, so we have just added this thing. Now after this what we will do, we will simply go after defs and we will use one shape where we can apply this gradient effect. So I'll just edit ellipse here, and I'm assuming you know about the ellipse because this thing we have already discussed multiple times. So cx equals to 100. Now I'm just providing the values. cy would be 70, rx would be 85, ry would be 55, and fill would be the gradient effect. So here I'll write URL #grad1. Okay, now simply save it and refresh the browser. So once you refresh it, you will see that something is like maybe something we have provided in a wrong way. Cx would be 100, cy would be 70, then 85, and then 55. Okay. Alright, so but you can see the effect, right? Linear gradient effect. I'm just looking for the shape. Maybe it is a bit different, but no problem. Like we are just talking about the color right now, so you can see this effect is coming properly. Now similarly, like here you can see the x1 and x2 value are same, different, and y1 y2 value are same. Now we will talk about the next method, which is vertical method. So in case of vertical method, we will make the x1 and x2 value as same by providing the 0% here, and y1 y2 value are different. Here I'll make 100%. Okay, and in color we will keep it as same. Just save it and refresh the browser. So now you can see it is going from top to bottom. Okay, so this is called vertical effect. In case of angular effect, we will keep the all values different. Okay, so here first value would be 0%, second would be 100%, third would be again 100%, and 0%. Now you can save it and simply refresh the browser. So this time you can see this is called angular gradient effect. Clear? So this is how we can utilize the linear gradient method with the help of linear gradient element. I hope this session is clear to all of you, and it is not always fixed that you have to use it for ellipse. You can use it for any shape, circle, you can see. Okay, so you can use it for any purpose. I just show you one example where we just used one ellipse. Okay, so yeah, I think now we are good to wind up this session, and that's all for today. In the next session we will discuss few more things. So thank you for watching Tech Sharmit.